being here so late in the conference. I really appreciate it. I know this is 3 o'clock on a Saturday on the last day of the conference, so we really do appreciate it. We got accessibility copies up here if you need one for both talks. And thank you to Peter for inviting me to be on this panel. And I am not Kelly Gavio, though it says that in the book. She's a friend of mine. She has a great book. This is only nerves. It's just nerves.
Yes, it's just
and it's terrific. It's about her experience with myasthenia gravis and also the culture of disability, which is really interesting. So for me personally, when I got invited to talk on this panel, I started thinking about the things I've been writing about, I don't know, since I was a teenager. And here are the themes: mutants, monsters, and supervillains. So why is that? All poetry is written by people with bodies, of course, and all poets can't help but write in a way that's unique to them and unique to their body. The length of a line might be affected by the depth of your breath, or the way that a poet perceives themselves as related to the world, which would inspire a different kind of form or a different kind of voice. Whether they write about childbirth or chronic illness or sex or disability, all of those are subjects that require the writer to purposely inhabit the body in their poems. So I've always been a bit unique, and that's impacted my poetry. I studied biology for my first degree, before I studied poetry in my graduate degree. So I had classes like medical botany and ecotoxicology and environmental law. I was always fascinated with the way that our systems worked or did not work. I was born with several mutations, including being born with a single kidney called a horseshoe and a genetic bleeding disorder. One doctor said to me, "We don't have statistics for people like you." Another asked me if I'd ever developed powers like the X-Men. I think it was a famous epidemiologist. I'm hearing about all of my mutations. The answer is no, but not yet. But I've got the wheelchair, and if I can get the Cerebro going, who knows. But you know, what's really interesting, I'm going off book here, but what's really interesting is in comic books, supervillains are almost always the ones that have disabilities. Have you noticed that? It's not the superheroes, because they, of course, have to be strong and perfect. So I was always more interested in the villain. My first book was called Becoming the Villainess. So, you know, I didn't have all of the problems that I have now then, but I must have felt it. And I had a poem called Becoming the Monster, It's Not So Bad, about the process of a woman becoming a dragon. So I think early on, I kind of had the feeling that, yes, I'm going to be different my whole life. That's just going to be a part of who I am. And so it's a part of my poetry as well. In the last 2 years, I've gone through some dramatic processes of being diagnosed with first stage 4 cancer, and then being told the liver's, though numerous, were probably benign, then being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. That was in 18 months, so that was fun. I had some mild neurological problems for years, but everything got way more dramatic. Suddenly I couldn't walk, I kept throwing up, I couldn't talk, and half my body wouldn't cooperate with me. So I was told I'd be in a wheelchair the rest of my life. The manuscript about this experience that I'm working on is called Flare, which is what they call MS lesions, acting up throughout the brain, and also with the unusual solar. How many of you guys are weather junkies? Like weather nuts? I love reading like solarweather.com. So kind of solar strangenesses that kind of have been happening the last 2 years. It's the first book where I directly address disability, and the first time I started thinking of my body as a disabled body. Side note, I was in a wheelchair for 4 years before I thought to ask my doctor for a handicap placard. So if you're in that position, please don't wait 4 years. I got a ticket a couple times, so. Anyway, so I'm talking about writing about the disabled body, but I'm still new to it. Almost all of my books deal with mythology, from Grimm's fairy tales to Japanese anime to comic book characters. I like to reimagine female characters in an empowering way, but often they share my own vision of myself as monstrous, mutant, other. I've been working with body horror. Have you guys ever heard of the term body horror? So when I was thinking about that, you know, Rosemary's Baby is about the scariness of pregnancy and different things. And I was like, oh my God, I've been writing body horror poetry for years, which was news to me. Except that I kept getting this woman, Ellen Datlow. She edits an anthology called The Best of Horror, different years, whatever. She kept putting my poems in her anthologies, and I was like, oh, I'm writing horror now. So that was a good discovery for me. But it's interesting coming from an MFA or a more academic setting. if you write a lot about monsters and comic books, you don't really feel like you're doing the right thing, but you have to do what makes you unique. I think that's what makes writing interesting. You have to kind of be yourself and inhabit yourself, and part of that is the body. So I encourage everybody who is different in whatever way to embrace those differences, because that is what will make your poetry or fiction or nonfiction great. So one of the poems that was included in this Best Horror of the Year collection is Introduction to the Body in Fairy Tales. And I'm going to read it at the end of this talk. It's in the book Field Guide to the End of the World from Moon City Press. They are sold out, but my husband still has the copies if you do want one. And I'm, of course, happy to sign up. And another poem that deals with body horror, which I might read after, is inspired by watching the movie on Cinemax late at night in a hotel called Zombie Stripper Clones. Has anyone ever seen that movie?
No, but I want to watch it.
Horrifying. Anyway, not good, but I wrote a poem, so then it's okay. And then there are poems from there's some previous books. So the books are Robot Scientist's Daughter, about growing up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Unexplained Fevers, She Returns to the Floating World, which is available to Sylvia's Press. If you get to see their booth, it's a beautiful booth. And you can take selfies with Walt Whitman cutouts or Emily Dickinson, so that's fun. So I hope that you'll think about form and function in your poems in relation to your own unique body. So, and thank you again for being here, because I just know how wiped out I am, and I know you guys must be wiped out too. And also, there's a Moon City reading tonight at White Owl Social Club. If you're up to it, 6 p.m., I recommend it. I'll be there, so it'll be fun. All right, I'm just going to read this quick poem, and I'll hand over, and then we'll ask questions. So if you guys have questions, which I hope you do. All right, Introduction to the Body in Fairy Tales. And you can tell me whether you feel this is a horror poem or not, because I don't think I meant it to be, because my mind is very dark. Okay, so. The body is a place of violence, wolf teeth, amputated hands. Cover yourself with a cloak of leaves, a coat of 1,000 furs, a paper dress. The dark forest has a code. The witch sometimes dispenses advice, sometimes eats you for dinner, sometimes turns your brother to stone. You will become a canary in a castle, but you'll learn plenty of songs. Little girl, watch out for old women and young men. If you don't stay in your tower, you're bound for trouble. This too is code. Your body is the tower you long to escape, and all the rotted fruit your babies. The bones in the forest your memories. The little birds bring you berries. The pebbles on the trail glow ghostly white. Oh, thank you.
So I thought that one thing we might do is I wanted to share just a little bit of my work.
Yeah.
We just heard a poem of yours. I've been. By the way, can you all hear me? Should I turn the mic different? Yeah. Is this better? Can you hear me now? I feel like I'm in a Verizon commercial, right? Is that Verizon or Sprint? Verizon. Yeah, one or the other. So I wanted to share just a little bit of my writing as well, and I wanted to read the title poem from my second book, American Paprika, which if you're looking to add another book to your collection to take home in your luggage that I'm sure that you brought simply to take books home, right? Because I can't be the only one who did that, right? Then you may wish to visit Salmon Poetry's booth. Salmon is just a wonderful press. They've been truly supportive of me. They just brought out my third collection here at AWP. Thank you. That one is called The Weight of Dandelions, but I thought I'd start just by reading the title poem from my second collection, which came out in 2016 from Salmon. It's called American Paprika. Paprika. There is a town in Hungary that is 3 miles away from the Austrian border. In the winter of 1956, mothers held hands with their sons and daughters and ran as fast as they could. When you asked where they were going, all they said was, away. It didn't matter where they had been. That wasn't the point anymore. The point, as far as anyone actually knew, was just to keep breathing. Husbands had gone into hiding, pressed a couple forains into their wives' palms, and then went off to keep breathing. Now it was up to the wives as mothers to keep breathing too. Mothers, of course, had the added burden of making sure their kids kept breathing. So they ran, and to make sure they stayed together, they held hands. And one of the things I think I'm always going back to in my work, similar to the poem that we heard from you, right, is this question of what is a body for, right? Because we know that we need bodies to breathe, we know that we need bodies to eat, we know that we need bodies to participate in the world, but I think it's so valuable to take up the tactile quality of writing, right? And to really think about when we are engaged in the work of writing, what is it that we are actually doing? I think without realizing it across all of my work, I've been sort of investigating what does it mean to use the body as an instrument through which to write. I'm not sure if that makes sense in the way that I'm articulating it, because much like Jeannine, I've had a long and wonderful conference, but we are nearing the wondrous conclusion, right? So I'm not always sure my words that I speak are, representing what's going on in my mind. But I think the idea is trying to think through and trying to think about what is a body for and what can a body do? And how might we utilize our possibilities and limitations to maximize our creative desires. I fully believe that we write because we must first. We write because we have to. We cannot imagine. Oh,
It's going down.
it keeps going down. No, you're fine. Thank you. Is this a little bit better? Great. So I fully believe that we write because we must. And I think that there's something that I need to continue exploring in my own work, which is what are the possibilities and limitations of the body? Any body, as well as my own body, as well as the bodies I come into closest contact with. I think that what I love about writing is that I never know what's going to show up on the page, but I just try to show up for my words every day. Or I try to show up for my words every week or every month. And sometimes it hurts like hell. Because I just, I write something and I say, God, Peter, you should be so much better at this than you are, right? But if I just try to show up, I find that even though I fail 95% of the time, that last 5%, I can sometimes feel the growth. And in those little moments, I think I'm working towards something that I feel truly called to.
I like that. Are we taking questions?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Yeah. We would love to hear questions. We would love to hear questions from the audience.
I like that.
Bingo call.
Come down.
Oh,
Right.
that's right. 064. Oh, 64. Questions from the audience.
Speaking about body horror, I think especially, I have an issue wherein I feel like as soon as I apply violence to a female body, I flip switches in predators that they want to reject that.
Yeah.
And they react very, very strongly to it. And I'm wondering how to navigate that world because that's such a big
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah. I'm going to pull this out again.
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
It's very phallic. I like it. Okay. Anyway, yes. So to talk about this, my first book had a poem called Remembering Philomel. So if any of you guys are old Ovid fans, he writes some spectacularly terrible stories about women. And Philomel is one of them where she's raped. She has her tongue cut out. She lives in a house. She sends a message by sewing a story into a picture. Then her sister gets the message. She kills her own son, feeds it to the husband. They all turn into birds. That's the end. But when I wrote the poem, I also intermixed the experiences of my own experiences being raped at 6. And so this poem was so, the word now is triggering. We didn't have that word when the book came out, but it was so triggering that students sometimes left the room. And I felt bad about that happening. I write about bad things happening to women a lot, and bad women. So those are difficult topics. People don't always like to see that, and I feel that's challenging. So to keep the reader engaged, which is what I think you're after, how do you make a bad girl sympathetic? How do you make something terrifying to look at okay to look at? And if we don't do that with our literature, how can we do it in our fucking lives, right? Excuse my language. But it's one of those things where we have to be able to discuss these things and especially for women. I think we've been shut up for a long time and left out of the story. So we need to kind of claim that story back. So I would say, yeah, you might have more trouble placing those poems, but I think they'll be more important for your readers. And that's what I've experienced as well, is that the stuff I feel like is really out there has been the stuff that has touched other people. Does that help? Peter?
Yeah, I think the other thing too is that it's so important to be sure that the work that we're writing is lifting up others that need space and need visibility and need room. And I think that for far too long, this is just my opinion, but for far too long, we've celebrated work that doesn't necessarily need celebration to live and survive and exist. I think it's so important that we be sure that as we are succeeding and making voices and making names for ourselves, it's so important that we bring in voices that wouldn't have otherwise had a space. I think that's something that I really feel is part of my own métier as a writer, to be sure that that anything I do well also helps others, because otherwise it's just kind of vanity, and that really makes me just feel like I'm not succeeding or not doing what I should be. Does that make sense?
There was another question. Who was the other person with their hand up?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I think writing about the body is inherently very personal.
Yeah.
And we navigate our own experiences and emotions and sometimes traumas.
Sure.
But I'm wondering how, if you could talk a little bit about navigating the ethics of writing about someone else's body or another body that's not your own.
That's a great question. Do you want to take that first? Yeah.
A tough thing to deal with, right? And I've done it a little bit in my own work, and I feel like you're always hedging your bets because you don't want to take over somebody else's experience, but I like writing about the other, so I keep doing it. So, I wrote in my second book, which is called She Returns to the Floating World, I wrote a poem in the voice of my actual husband, which I'd never done before, but it's pretty easy because I've lived with him for 25 years now, so I got the voice, I think. But it was because I'm like, oh, am I taking liberties? Or when I'm writing about a family member or friend. And a lot of times I make those characters into other characters, so I have a lot of persona work, which is how I kind of wiggle around some of the ethical questions. I'm very sneaky at like this. That's a secret, so please don't spread that around.
It's a good secret.
Yeah, thank you. That's fine. But also, thinking about how to respect the other, right? Like I think that's yeah.
Oh yeah, I think that's a great point. And to build on that, I've also written persona poems before, but I think the thing that was hardest for me in my first book, which is called Kicking Gravity, which came out in 2013, I wrote some really personal stuff, which even though it wasn't autobiography, the people that I was writing about kind of knew it was about them. I'm not sure that makes sense, but I think you sort of knew what I mean. Like, I tried to make it fictional, but the people that were involved in the pieces I was writing, they sort of figured out what I was doing. And honestly, that was challenging. That was hard. Because they occasionally felt offended. They occasionally felt that I had in some way betrayed them. And I just sort of decided, there's a great line that I really hope I have this right. I think it's Anne Carson who says, if people wanted you to write better about them. Sharon Olds, probably. I'm probably getting it wrong. It is probably Sharon Olds.
I could be wrong.
But the quote is, if people wanted you to write better about them, they should have behaved better, right? Is the ending, right? And I'm sorry if I got the author wrong. Please forgive me.
They're all good.
Sorry, Sharon Olds. But I think the idea is, right, that if you feel that you need to write, then don't necessarily put those concerns front of mind about how the audience may take that. Now, this is not to say that you should write your most personal details or that you should write a story that's really going to harm a relationship. There are several poems that I'm waiting to write because the people that the people that would recognize them are people that I love dearly, even though there are scenes I want to work through. So I think one should use some discretion about how to do that, but I think it's a really difficult and personal topic. I have some poems that, even though I enjoyed writing them and it was a kind of catharsis to write them, I struggle to, for example, read them aloud in public settings or in readings, because I worry that if I'm reading this poem and in the middle I just start crying because it's so much for me, I worry that people are just going to wonder, what's this guy doing? What's he up to, right? So part of it is also, it's not that I'm protecting necessarily the other, right? But it's in a way that I'm protecting myself. And I think that that's something that I'm still navigating. And I hope that in my next book or future projects, it might become more clear. Does that kind of answer your question? I'm sorry, I feel like I'm rambling.
Yeah,
thank you. Are there other questions or things that came up in the course of our conversation? Yes?
I'm interested in that relationship between horror and fairy tale.
Yeah.
A little bit, or even the grotesque. And when you read your poem, I didn't feel that it was horror, but all of the images from the fairy tales, right? From the this late afternoon. The fairy tales are horror-like. And then you recounted the story of Philomel. Well, if that's not a horror story,
Yeah,
what
is?
is?
What is?
And so it's a little bit a question of genre. When we put something into horror, are we putting it in a container to make it safer?
Right.
Or what's with that? That's a question.
Good
That's a
question.
really good question.
Yeah, because like I said, it was just interesting. I didn't even know there was like a niche for poetry. There's a sci-fi poetry association. There was a horror poetry association. Now I know about them, but I didn't when I started writing. So I think there's a big niche for that. And by the way, speculative magazines pay money.
They do.
In case you're interested in money. It's always a nice thing. But to your question, does calling it horror make it safer? Does it? I mean, question mark, right? Because you know what you're getting. You said, oh, I'm not going to be reading a Gettysburg Review, and then I'm going to be thrown in the middle of a dragon eating a corpse or something. So I think people want to put things in cages, want to put things in boxes. I have never been good at that, either discerning the boxes or writing into the boxes. So I'm sort of one of those free-floating weirdos, and I prefer that.
I think that's the way to be.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. If you can't be weird, and you're writing, right?
Right, and I think that, just to add to what you're saying, I've found that when I try to put things in boxes, or I try to put things over there, and I try to say, okay, now stay over there, right? Stay in this box that I created for you, section 3 of my manuscript that doesn't even exist yet, right? I created this section where I put all these things that are weird, right? I find that when I do that, it's actually destructive to my writing process, because I'm not honoring the things that really want to come forward in my own work. I don't know, have you had a similar experience?
Yeah, for 100, well, and two, so I've written 5 books now, all right, so everybody expects certain things from what I write, and then the last book I wrote was all about being diagnosed with cancer and then MS, and I have a whole lot of tree poems, which I had never in my life written, and I'm like, oh my God, the people that like my poetry are gonna hate this book. On the other hand, maybe the publishers who haven't published me before will consider this book.
Right.
So it's, we're all on a journey, but I think that the thing is, don't label yourself anything. We don't have to do that. We can be put into I think my first book actually got put into feminism in the bookstore instead of poetry, which, I don't know if that helps or hurts your sales.
Probably depends, right?
Yeah. It was interesting. Like, why did that get classified under a different genre?
Right.
Because it's just that feminist. I don't know. But I thought it was funny. And so what I would say is stretch the boundaries, test the boundaries, don't let yourself be. But yes, everything in fairy tales is literally a horror story with a warning in it. Because my belief is all those stories were made up by people who were trying to protect children from a whole lot of bad stuff that was going on in society. And, rape and child molestation and parents murdering their children for no reason. That stuff was going on. It's always been going on, right? So it's not news how we can open up grounds to any story, and you get old Andrew Lang, Chinese fairy tales, Russian fairy tales, Japanese fairy tales. I've studied them all, and they all have the same way of warning people. That's what I like about them. Did I answer your question?
It was great. I mean, the answer can be broad.
All right, good. But if you need more.
Yeah.
I found myself recently writing a lot about like religion or spirituality, and I'm wondering if either of you have found like focusing on like the poetics of the body, the kind of like binary opposite of that, if you find there's like a poetics of the soul or of the spirit or spirituality that you find goes in tandem, or how you talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I think the answer, I think the one-word answer to your question is yes.
Yeah.
But I think a little bit more broadly, what I would say is that I feel like I'm always writing about the soul and the spirit and some journey that I'm on that I probably don't even know all the details of. To give you just one example, my father was educated at a Benedictine monastery. I am neither a Benedictine nor somebody that really likes monasteries, but at the same time, I think that whatever you believe, whatever faith tradition calls you, or whatever sort of guides your life's work in a spiritual sense, I think I'm always unraveling that, always in some way wrestling with that. I've learned to love that grappling because I think it has caused me in moments to be using or overusing a particular word or a particular scene or a particular feeling. I was working on my second book, and I went through it and I realized that like 40 of the 50 poems had the word blue in them, right? So I started thinking about like, what does that word mean to me? Because I decided, I guess in my head, that there was a spiritual connection there, that there was something about water or the sky or something, a direction in which I was pulled. So I guess what I would say is if you feel that there is a spiritual journey or quest that you're on, just embrace the fact that that's happening and don't try to over-understand it too quickly. I'm the sort of person, I'm extraordinarily analytical, usually to my own detriment. I try and figure out why things are going on way too soon. And I think one thing that's really helped me as a writer is just to sort of embrace the fact that I don't always have to have the answer. It's terrifying for me in the journey to not know where I'm going, but at the same time, I'm learning to embrace the fact that maybe it's okay to be terrified. Maybe it's in fact something that takes me to a new place, right? I have to be able to open doors that at one point I might have been too afraid to. Does that answer your question?
Anyway, so I have a different answer because I grew up with no religion and then sort of converted to pretty conservative Christianity when I was a teenager, kind of by myself, just reading the Bible, being a weirdo, as I am, and that has stayed with me. I mean, I'm not super excited about the way the church treats women or disabled people, some of the stuff in the Old Testament, but the Bible influences what I write and the way I think about God. I can't help it, right? Once it's in there, it's kind of in there. So I was thinking, if you read all of my books, like there's Bible verses in every book, but they're usually hidden. I don't really attribute them, and people are like, "That's a fantastic line." I'm like, thanks, God wrote it. But it's funny. But and the other thing I was going to say is I'm tremendously influenced by the spirituality of this dude who makes anime movies called Hayao Miyazaki. And if you haven't seen his work, it's tremendously spiritual in a way. And he says he's an atheist, but it's clear that the spirit of the forest, this idea of a savior that comes from nature, that it permeates all his work. And so that has also influenced my poetry quite a bit. I mean, I've written a ton of stuff that references, if you're a Miyazaki fan, basically you can just read my work and be like, oh, she's putting in code words for, My Neighbor Totoro or Nazca, different things. So I think Japanese nature spirituality has been really interesting to me too. Not just the Bible. It's like, well, those things creep into your work because they're part of you, right? And if spirituality becomes part of the body, then it gets to your poetry too, right? And also those things they sort of get woven into your memory and spirit, all that stuff. Yeah. All right, are we okay?
We're great.
All right.
I would love to hear your poem "They Are Now Regenerated."
Oh, sure. I have it open. So
Yes.
So this is my Zombie Shimmer Clones poem. You'll be subjected to it. But I took it from the perspective of the girls who were, I think they were being killed and then thrown to a pool of something, toxic waste, and then they came out these beautiful zombies. I was like, how do they feel about that? Right? They are not regenerating. We are not zombies thrown into a pool of dubious origin and coming back beautiful but decaying, unsure of how to live, pretending to swim, eat yogurt like regular girls. We are not clones, despite being drawn to specifications 26, 36, 36, and bearing bouffants and bikinis. We might hack each other to pieces, but we are not confused about our identities, living or not living. We continue in the shape we are given. Our cells cannot regenerate, and the scientist names us dead. We are not regenerating. We cannot reproduce ourselves. We cannot be anything but the fulfillment of your fantasy, flesh-eating or not. That's my zombie short films for me.
One of the things I think that I really appreciate about your work and about that poem in particular is how you are thinking about and thinking through what it means to be alive and what it means to be dead. And sort of the way that the zombie moment, I think, challenges that.
Yeah.
And so if I might take the liberty of asking you a question,
Yes.
I wondered if you would talk about the sort of liminal space, as it were, between being alive and being dead,
Yeah.
and how it influences your writing and your thinking about poetry and the body in particular.
Absolutely, and I've been thinking about it a lot, especially when I was told I had 6 months to live 2 years ago. So I thought about how do we grieve,
Right.
and I decided that for me it was, I just started taking pictures of trees all the time, and I haven't stopped yet, and I wondered about that connection.
Right.
You know, the idea that trees are always changing, and the tree you thought would be there forever gets cut down while you're still alive, but the tree could have outlived you, you know? And so this whole idea of are you living or non-living, and the zombie is it's a non-living living creature. It's an impossible creature, just like vampires, and I like those too. And I think about what that means for us as humans. What does that mean that we are so obsessed with that idea, right? So yeah, for me, I mean, just being on the cusp of being told, hey, you're gonna die, we don't have anything we can do about it, there's no chance of any treatment, that's what I was told. Total lives. Anyway, but when you get news like that, you have one or two choices. You know, you can fight, or you can accept it, or you can do this third thing, which is to sort of accept it and sort of fight it and say, hey, I'm gonna live my best fucking life as long as I can. And I remember I was supposed to get a chemo treatment, and instead I canceled because there was an Amy Mann and Billy Collins joint thing, and I was like, I'm going to that instead.
You made the right decision.
Yeah, thanks. It was way more fun, I'm pretty sure. But I was thinking, like, I also went to AWP LA the week after I was told I was dying. And I was like, this is the life-affirming thing I can do right now. And so my whole life has kind of changed to be not about fun exactly, but about living the kind of life that would make you proud to live it. You want to leave people behind that love you. It doesn't matter that you don't have kids, you're not poet laureate of the United States or whatever. It just matters that you have been kind and you've been, you know, useful in some way. I'm getting teary.
There's a wonderful sense of fulfillment in that journey too, right?
Yeah.
That I'm going to affirm the things that matter most to me, and with apologies for my upcoming language, fuck everything else,
Yeah.
right? Because if I would imagine if one knows they only have X amount of time to live, right, then the things that become important are the things that we feel most fully sustain and gratify us,
Yeah.
right? And I don't mean gratification in the sort of self-serving gratification, but in the, you know, what kind of legacy do I feel called to build sense? And I think that's just a really good way of thinking about it and thinking through, you know, poetry and the body and in general, just the creative enterprise as well.
Yeah, 100%. And it has, I've written 2 books in 2 years. They're not published yet, but I wrote a ton during this whole time, and I think that's something that being ill can, plus a lot of waiting rooms. They're great places to write, because you just are so miserable and so impatient, it's terrible. There's nothing good about waiting rooms, 0, except stealing the magazines. That's the only thing about it. But, and having time to write, so you write a lot of poems. All right, how are we doing?
We've got until 4:15, so we're good.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, we have so much time.
We do.
All right.
And I would love to ask if there are other questions from the audience or things that we might do to sort of to answer things that you've been thinking about or looking at or considering. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, anything. We'll answer anything.
We'll answer anything.
Literally anything.
If you want, I'll tell you my high school mascot.
Oh, what?
What was it?
It was a Spartan, and I told my parents that I really wanted to be the Spartan, and they had the interesting task of reminding me that perhaps it was not something that I should really be engaging physically, right? Because to be the Spartan, one had to put on this giant costume and run around, and even though even though it's something I would have loved to do, it might have taken me a little bit longer than the high school would have liked to sort of be doing the running around in the wheelchair. Who knows? But I think that there are always questions sort of about the body and about its limitations and its possibilities, and I think that we often grapple with them in whichever sort of situation we find ourselves in.
I think you'd have made a great Spartan.
Oh, thank you.
Me too.
All I need is
One
Marty.
of the haters.
That's right. All I need is Marty McFly's time machine, right? His DeLorean. We've got to set it up for the right date and time, and then I think I have to go for it.
Yeah.
I think I have to do it. Yes.
Have you, either of you ever written some poems about the body of another person?
Good question.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, I do that all the time. Well, I do it all the time because I'm constantly imagining. So, I wrote a whole book about the fox wife, who's a famous character in Japanese mythology, who is a beautiful woman who attracts a man, and then, sometime after they're married, she changes back into a fox and leaves him with kids that are half fox and half human. And I was super fascinated with that, so I wrote like a whole book about it for no reason. And I was like, there's no audience for this, but I published it anyway, and that's the one that's at 2 Sylvius now. And I think it was super interesting. My fascination with it was, one, what is that relationship between the husband and wife of a woman who disappears, right? Who cannot be there physically. No reason I had any. But, that was interesting to me. And I think, and then in Unexplained Fevers, which is my third book, everybody in the book was a Grimm's fairy tale character who had a modern affliction, like chronic fatigue syndrome or hooked on heroin. Sleeping Beauty, I think, was hooked on heroin, and Snow White had chronic fatigue. And I thought, this is an interesting way to explore health issues in a way that won't be threatening. Or, we were going back to that topic, how do you make things unthreatening for people? It's super hard to talk about illness, there's not a lot of acceptance of that. So how do you soft serve it, sort of? So that was sort of my attempt to do that, and that is why I've written stuff about other people's bodies, because and in a way, you're lying in an IV. How different is that from a heroin addict? You're getting dilaudid. It's chemically the same thing. So, have you been a heroin addict? So I'm like, I sort of experienced that, but.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've had a couple of surgeries in my life to try and improve my lower extremities, to try and improve my legs. And I'm actually really grateful that when I was 13, I had hamstring lengthenings. And the doctor decided that they were going to put me on a heavy dose of morphine.
Oh, yeah, that's good stuff.
That is the reason that I've never taken drugs since then, right?
Yeah, you don't want it after that.
Because the reality is that, once we've felt our body in an altered state, it's not exactly like writing about another, but I certainly didn't feel like myself at the time. Once we've had that experience, we realize, or at least I guess I realized, how fortunate I was to have my mental capabilities, how fortunate I was to be able to do what I can do with my hands, how important it was for me to remain as active as I can, to try and make the best use of the body that I have. And certainly, I don't mean to sugarcoat it or bright-side it at all, right? Because there are moments when it's painful and difficult and challenging. But at the same time, I think there's a recognition that if we experience something that makes us feel like the other, right, or makes us feel like not ourselves, I've tried really hard to glean whatever small bits of perspective I can from that. Because I think that we need to, as writers, remember that everything is material, right? So, if something happens in your life, write it down, keep it. I advise my students, and I try to follow this myself too, never throw anything you write away. I'm the really nerdy dork who will leave a message for myself on the answering machine because I'll be somewhere going from A to B, and I was thinking to myself, I cannot forget this. So I always say, hi Peter, this is Peter, and be sure you remember this, right? And I'm sure there's a better way to do this. I'm sure that you all can teach me an easier way to do this, but remembering everything is material for the next poem, the next story, the next book, the next thing, has really helped me a lot. Yeah. Are there other questions from the audience or things that we can answer? Anything at all?
Anything you didn't hear about that you were
That
coming
you
to
wanted to hear
this?
about?
Do you want me to pretend to be Kelly Davio? I can do a sort of good accent.
And if you want, I can try to pretend to be Alex Lemon.
Yeah.
I will say that both Alex and Kelly have, for me, been extraordinarily helpful, kind, instructive, generative. They're incredible people and even better writers. And I think that,
Check them out.
yeah, absolutely. Check out all their work because, like so many of us, they're writing things that are vital and necessary and that aren't otherwise covered right now. And I think it's so important that we celebrate them. And I know that each of them are here with us in spirit, even though circumstances did not allow them to be with us in body.
I was waving at them.
Great, me too.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I think it's interesting that talking about the body inherently implies a separation of mind and body.
Sure.
And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you explore separation or integration of mind, body, heart, or any other like, identities of human experience in your writing or approaching how you write or even in your writing process.
I was joking about this panel to my mother when I was talking about it because I said, poets like to think of themselves as brains on balloons that are attached to a heavy body. They like to think of ourselves, the important stuff is up in the balloon. And I think that one of the things about having these terrifying things happening to me all the time has been, oh, you are part of a body. In fact, the way you think, the way you remember, the way you love, the way you hate, the way you feel all the time, that's all part of your body. So we talk about mind-body separation. It really doesn't. I'll tell you right now, when you get a bunch of lesions in your brain and it changes your personality, I mean, you can't help but admit, hey, you are a body. You are in a body, and you can't say you're not anymore. Which was challenging for me. I think I've always been one of the poets that was like, thought balloon, that's me. Not this, not the meat flesh, not the meat bag part, but now I'm trying to integrate that. And when you have things that make you suffer all the time, you're like, oh shit, this weird symptom or whatever. It also ties you to remembering the good things, So you want to celebrate. In fact, I wrote a poem recently called, do you know there's a meme going around called, sex is great, but have you tried blank, hot blankets after, I don't know, it was a bunch of stuff. Getting out of the shower, laying on warm towels. But I thought, and I wrote a sapphic lyric, based on Sappho. So I was like, we write about sex in a different way when you have some problems, right? And you write about humor in a different way, I think. Did I answer? Vaguely in that?
Yeah, I think building on that, which I think is a wonderful answer, and I agree with you 100%. What I notice is that I'm always trying to separate things out into categories. And that the more that I realize that it's all part of one human experience, the easier it is for me to keep writing. What worries me sometimes is when I'm trying to make sense of a difficult poem, or if I'm trying to, sometimes if I'm trying to write sonnets or something very formal or something very tight, I'll try to think about what are the component parts of something here? Like, how does one make a sonnet, or how does one write a triolet or something? And I think what's really helped me, both in writing and probably in life too, is to realize that sometimes, even though writers want to make those categories, the most valuable generative thing that I've found is just to sort of embrace the fact that we can't understand things in such discrete terms, right? That it's all part of one thing. One of my favorite thinkers is a Kentucky poet and writer and activist, a guy named Wendell Berry, and he says that ultimately it's all about this. That ultimately it's all about the same big shooting match, right? That ultimately we are all just here living life and being together. And I think it's so valuable, for me at least, to remember that, right? That creating these categories, creating these separations is sometimes more artificial than the simple act of living, right? And if I'm having a difficult day, or I find that if I'm really tired, for example, and so I need to rest more than I would like, I just sort of remember that there was a day when I did some great stuff, right? And maybe today is just the day when I'm resting. And that in resting, hopefully that'll be something that then gives rise to a more exciting, generative, new idea, right? I'm always challenging myself. I try really hard to fail as much as I can. Because I think that in failure, I've learned more than I've ever learned from doing anything right or anything well. But part of what I have to do to embrace that is to realize that categories and sort of separation makes it, makes that process even harder than it would otherwise be.
Anyone else? Good? Happy? And ready for this conference to be almost over?
We're all set. Do you guys have good dinner plans? Are there places that we should know about, or things that are going on?
Yeah, come get this. Come get a copy of this. Oh, come to Moon City Press's reading tonight, White Owl Social Club, 6 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.